Sport Integrity Week, and Jacobs with you. A very good afternoon. We're heading into our evening session now. We've got 5 o'clock CET, that's 4 GMT, and of course, still in the morning if you are listening over in America. And then we've got a little bit of a break, and 9 CET, 8 GMT, that's 3 Eastern. We have focused on Brazil, clean sport as a tool for the development of Brazil. So do stay tuned for that one. If you'd like to get involved as well, the hashtag is SIW. And once you've registered, you can ask questions through the app as well. Our moderators are across your thoughts, and we'll try and put as many of them throughout the course of the remainder of Sport Integrity Week to each of our panelists. So up next, we've got an intriguing panel. The focus today, very broadly speaking, is how technology and innovation relates to integrity. And the focus of the panel for the next hour or so is to look at technology in the context of the future. Very simply put, what is the next big thing in technology and innovation that relates to sporting integrity? Of course, in recent years, the widespread introduction of technology has increased performance and worked towards ensuring greater technology-related fair play. But by the same token, innovation comes with its challenges as well. And one of the key questions too is, are those looking to create issues, looking to push malpractice and so on, are they themselves using technology, and are they ahead or behind us in the world of integrity, trying to use our own technology to stop them? So these are some of the questions that we're going to be delving in over, like I say, the course of the next hour. To introduce our panel, I'm delighted to be joined by our moderator, that is Dan Mannix, the CEO of CSM North America. Dan, a very good afternoon to you, or morning, of course, if you are in North America, as the title suggests. Thanks for joining us. Very much looking forward to this panel. I'll hand it over to you to introduce the guests and set the scene.
Thanks so much, Ben. It is good morning here, and good afternoon to everybody around the world. Super excited to discuss the next big thing, which has been accelerated during COVID with so many things happening within sport and innovation. So first, want to introduce the panel, and then we'll jump right into that. So I'll go around the horn, and then we'll come back into the subject. So John Kozner.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Kozner. I am a 4-decade veteran of sports media here in the United States. For 20 years, I worked at ESPN, where I helped build all of the ESPN digital media franchises, ESPN.com, the app, streaming, etc. And I'm now an investor, advisor, and consultant with sports tech startups in the US and around the world, operating out of New York City.
Super, thanks, John. And I had the privilege to work with John at the NBA a number of years ago. So thank you, John. Philippe?
Yes. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I don't know. I'm Philippe Châtelain. I'm the CEO of Inextor. Inextor is a leading provider of technology for track and trace, something everybody is talking about now, traceability. This is our core business. We fight counterfeit, we fight issue criminal, basically based on products, and we try really to have the different technology applied to many different things. We will talk most probably about that in the sport equipment.
Super, thank you. Genevieve Gordon?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invite, Siga. I have two hats. I'm a sports lawyer, and I am the director of a research centre at De Montfort University. Its snappy title is Crystal, which is essentially the Centre for Research for Innovation, Sport, Technology and Law. So I look forward to enjoying the panel with everybody else.
Super. And we also are excited to have Ricardo Mazzucca.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Dan. Good day to everybody. Really happy for the invitation and glad to join this panel. Well, I'm from Brazil. I used to work for Global TV, the global group company, for more than 20 years in the sports marketing department. And currently, I'm the board member of Arena Hub. Arena Hub, for those who doesn't know, is a knowledge and innovation center that stimulates entrepreneurship and seeks to develop the sports media and entertainment industries, generating social and economic impact, but really encouraging and connecting the sports industry ecosystem, startups, sports entities, brands, investors, athletes, universities, research centers, and media companies. We're really supporting and accelerating initiatives, ideas, and and companies that uses sports to create game-changing technologies to promote digital and social transformations. Really glad to join this panel with you guys.
Super, and I'm looking forward to talking about some of the game-changing technologies in this session. So last but not least, Angela Ruggiero.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, excited to be a part of this. I was a 4-time Olympian in the sport of ice hockey. I have a gold, a couple silver, and a bronze. Pivoted my career to work on the business side of sports, spent 8 years on the International Olympic Committee, the board of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, was the global athlete rep there. Through my work in sports on the business side, I saw that technology was absolutely disrupting and changing the game. So 4 years ago, started a company called Sports Innovation Lab. We're the leading market research and strategy company, really helping brands and properties and the whole ecosystem create breakthrough fan experiences through technology. So we think about technology each and every day. We have a proprietary data engine that helps us see insights into the market and support the whole ecosystem around innovation and change and disruption. And, during COVID, everyone's trying to think about this. So we feel blessed to have been thinking about it for the last 4 years.
Super. Well, so let's jump in. Thank you, everyone. One thing to tee up. So I was up late last night watching a double overtime game of the defending champion Toronto Raptors. And it was a great example of how technology impacts sports and direction. One of the replays probably, and the play being changed the course of the game and had the Raptors win the game. So it's just an example that we see every day of how technology is impacting the outcome of sports. So let's start there for a second. I'll start with John and we'll go around the horn for perspectives. So much has also changed during COVID and innovation that's been required to pivot. What have you seen, John, from a technology and innovation standpoint that you feel is exciting and is really having an impact on changing sports?
I think we have to start with video conferencing. The Zoom conference that we're on now, the images of the fans live last night from the Orlando bubble while we were watching the Raptors and Celtics play. The video conference has just transformed the world. It's allowed many of us who have no choice to work at home. It's allowed sports to continue in different ways. And in the context of sports integrity, it's helped fuel the boom in esports, but is also a challenge because if we can't see exactly what's going on, it creates other problems and potential risk. So I think so much is wrapped up in the development of video conferencing, which is amazing, and I believe it's here to stay. Will expand in different ways.
Super. Philippe, I know you from the technology standpoint have a number of patents, so clearly look at this in terms of authentication, and how you're tracking and tracing data. What do you see as something that's really impacting the current sports environment, and what's going to be a trend that's going to continue over the next number of months?
Okay, my perspective, again, I'm totally aligned with that. We have to change the way we live. We have to change the way we communicate. We see that today we are, let's say, a lot of people around the table through screen. It's a new stuff. Now, concerning my view on integrity and the need for related to the COVID, the learning is sports needs money, and this money needs, basically this financial flow is coming from different elements. What I can do as basically a company to help in this game basically is to provide protection to the product, because that all sport equipment and all the ticketing and all this relevant merchandising related to sports is a big flow of money for sports and for federation. And this is basically protecting by technology, giving a chance to make sure that the consumer can make sure that he's buying a genuine product. That more than $10 billion in US basically is due to criminal organization for counterfeiting, roughly $500 million in Europe. It's serious stuff. Financial flow needs to be guaranteed. One of the solutions could be basically to protect better the genuine product in equipment.
So, Philippe, you mentioned the consumers, and obviously the integrity of sports and tied to the importance of consumers having faith and trust in the outcomes and fair play. Genevieve, there's so much happening with athlete performance to enhance athlete performance, data that's being shared, obviously discussions with players associations and unions of who controls that data. Where is that exciting, and what innovations are happening right now that are encouraging, and where are there some red flags potentially within that?
So I think from a point of view for research, from my background, the technology is by its very nature innovative, but it also is going to be restrictive and often quite harmful. So I guess for me, the question is about the ethical considerations around what's seen as a positive advancement. So if you think about facial recognition for tickets, which I think some of the American sports have been thinking about doing and have done trials on, if you think about cloning technology, the cloning concept has been around for 20 plus years, and some sports allow cloning of animals and other sports don't allow cloning for animals, and I'm sure there are organizations out there that know exactly how to clone a human being, and whether it's involved in sport or not, that's not for me to say. But simple things from swimsuits, the changes in the swimsuit construction, all the way through to this kind of mad concept of cloning, is things that I think are particularly interesting from especially a welfare point of view.
Interesting. And one thing maybe we get into a little bit later is, where AI plays into that, to be able to track trends, because there's one of the challenges, I think, with the integrity of sport is it's always having to be reactive to the next thing that either, whether it's athletes or teams or from a technology standpoint of getting that, anything that can give someone an advantage within the competition, and even probably exacerbated more than ever because of the economic challenges right now with COVID, of the pressure to drive new revenue streams. So we definitely want to touch on the monetary impact. Ricardo, what are your thoughts on this related to the subject?
Well, I think digital transformation is a must happen, and data. I think data is a crucial thing that became even more important day by day. I mean, what John mentioned in the beginning, the Zoom, this new video conferencing, everybody's collecting data from all the time, and so sports organizations will have to manage this, and will have the benefits of collecting this whole bunch of data. On the other hand, I mean, risks of it is how you're going to use this in a responsible way. I think that's a point I have to ask and pay attention. How is the responsible data used? How are you going to control what can be used or can be not disclosed? So I think these are some points that we have to be paying attention for the coming times.
Interesting. So Angela, you can come at this from so many perspectives, right? Because Sports Innovation Lab is studying the impact of technology and the impact on the fluid fan and sports properties, but obviously you also competed at the highest level of sport. And for the audience to know, you were also a representative to the IOC as an athlete representative. So I'm sure involved with a lot of discussions. What's the lens that you're looking at this, and what do you think are the most the trends that are standing out the most right now currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ricardo hit it on in terms of data. Like we just don't know who our fans are, and the more this digital transformation, the more that we can understand, we can create a more personalized experience. So I'll park that because Ricardo, I think, said it well. The thing that I think is very transformational, and this was pre-COVID, but exacerbated in COVID, is sports betting. We know that obviously the European market has been doing it for years, but the fact that the American market is now pushing hard, there's a ton of money. We all know you 20 times more likely to engage with content when you have money on the line. What betting is doing to this market is, one, it's changing the latency of delivering sports to you, because you need real-time results, right? So it's actually changing the ecosystem of sports and that delivery, and I'm sure John could speak to this. The data coming off the athlete, initially there was a huge push to all the wearables to help on the performance side. And this year, if you go on our website, sportsilab.com, we said the market's splitting in two. Yes, there's performance data, but a lot of that data is very valuable from a fan engagement perspective, from a sports betting, from an overlay, think about what's going on in your second screen now. So that data that the athlete is now giving up, so to speak, is worth something. Yes, they want to get paid. We could go down that rabbit hole, which they should. But it's very valuable for the fan and for the properties that exist. And then finally, it's another source of revenue. Think about what COVID's doing. Decimating budgets. Think about local budgets. Again, I'll speak from the American perspective. And now the states that were sort of like, is this something we want to do? Believe me, when they see the numbers that by them allowing sports betting, and there's only a few states that have adopted it, but I think we're going to see a domino effect here simply for the revenue that it can generate. So from a latency perspective in the venue and at home, you just need a new infrastructure. You need better infrastructure. The athletes they could monetize this as per the leagues and all the properties. So we're gonna, I think, see those side leaning into it. And from a local government perspective, again, I think sports betting is just another cash cow that maybe Europe has benefited from, but this market hasn't really been been lukewarm to it, I think, until COVID hit.
It's interesting in terms of how, to that point, how North America catches up. Sports betting definitely, logos and patches on jerseys, some of the things that Europe and the rest of the world's been ahead of the curve. So Zoom was referenced. You think of the brands that are jumping out now. Peloton's in the news all the time, tripled their stock price during COVID. We mentioned wearables. Whoop's gotten a lot of play with how they, identified COVID or a positive test within the PGA. What brands are standing out? This is for anybody on the panel. What brands are really standing out that have risen above and are having a positive impact on sports and technology that are enhancing the fan experience as well?
I mean, I just want to talk about Whoop for a second, just because it touches on a bunch of themes that Angela had referenced. When Nick Watney, a PGA Tour golfer, at one of the early tournaments, he wasn't feeling well, and he got a COVID test, and the test came back negative. But when he looked at his Whoop, which is a wearable that tracks a different set of biometrics 24/7, he noticed that his respiratory rate, which doesn't change much and typically was 14, was 18. And he is alarmed by this. He went and got a second COVID test. The second test was positive. He told Rory McIlroy, who is one of the top PGA Tour golfers and is also a Whoop user. I think he's a Whoop investor. Rory told Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA Tour, and within 36 hours or so, all of the tour pros and the caddies, et cetera, people involved in the operational side were wearing Whoops. And while there are any number of value to the sort of quantified athlete, it was like an unintended positive consequence that it turns out that it's a device that has a trigger that could alert you to the possibility of a virus infection. So there are a lot of different things that come together there. And again, it's the kind of serendipity that you see with technology. But now that it's happened, I don't think we're ever going back, meaning that I think Whoop and other different other devices that will track athlete health and well-being and will do it on an all-day basis are here to stay. And there are going to be benefits to it. There are ethical issues that are created. There's the value, as Angela and others said, the value of the data created. But it's really a sort of, it's something that really came to the fore in the last few months just because of the confluence of events that we could not have predicted.
Which is interesting. And Genevieve, I'm curious your take. So that's incredible in terms of what Whoop's been able to track and identify. I know from working with some players associations, then there's the side of who controls the data and how it's used. Yep. So imagine if you're a football goalie and Whoop tracks your sleep. And if a coach knows that you got no sleep the night before for whatever reason, suddenly you get scratched or pulled from the game because of that data? And there's then the sensitivity of, do athletes, when they're up for renewal of contracts, what data is available and to who? And then, from a fan standpoint, be exciting to get more access to data if it can be presented the right way in terms of telling more stories. What's your take on that, Genevieve? Because I know you look at it from a legal standpoint as well.
Right, yeah. So, listen, I think it's only a matter of time before athletes really start saying, where is this data going? What is it helping you do and what is it helping me do. Fundamentally, the athletes create the data, and they, should own the data, but they don't really know what's being collected. They don't know what's being stored. They don't know how it's being stored, or indeed how long it's been stored for. And yeah, we've just it's just been all in the papers about a couple of players that have gone out and broken COVID rules and taken a couple of girls back to their room when they're on a training in a training camp. And if they're wearing something like the Whoop app or the Whoop technology, then they are going to know. And I think I don't think anyone is naive enough to think that coaches and teams around a sporting group don't know what their athletes are doing. But I think it's the level of content and the level of information that you can now hold on somebody, and the impact that may have. Dan, you've said about when they're out of contract and returning to a contract, or indeed trying to get a new contract, and I honestly think it is only a matter of time before athletes start questioning this idea of Article 8 and the freedom of privacy, and that all of these technologies could contravene that concept of Article 8 in human rights legislation.
Well, it's interesting also when you think of privacy and drug testing and where you have to track, or if you. Yeah. As a human being, do you want to have your whereabouts constantly be known by someone? Nah, it's a little potentially scary, so to speak.
If I could jump in there, we all wear watches now. Quantified athlete is an extension of quantified self. We all want to understand our bodies better. I think this is the direction of the world, right? So athletes should benefit from knowing more about their bodies. But to your point, I think who sees that versus the privacy, GDPR compliance, like data portability, like the smarter athletes become. And again, I was an athlete, chair of the Athletes Commission. The more we can educate athletes to say, data is the most valuable thing, not just from a performance perspective. Yes, it's very valuable for your trainer to know and your entourage and people you trust, but that data is being sold. That data is super valuable. It enriches the media experience. It's enriching sports betting. The more we can, again, educate the athletes on what it's worth, and by the way, the properties, because in my opinion, most properties don't think this way. They think they have a sports team, not a media empire, not a data empire. And again, that's the trajectory of sports media and entertainment. It's moving in that direction very quickly. And again, better understanding the value of this data and how it's shared and, what's proprietary and what are your rights, I think is the conversation that teams and leagues, but also the athletes should understand, because they could decide to monetize it themselves, go direct to consumer. They don't need to go through their team anymore. They can just start posting their heart rate on their own Twitter profile. And wow, that's really interesting for that athlete as a brand. So I think this is a very hot topic that I'm encouraged to see more athletes getting on top of, and but as well as the properties and the whole ecosystem understand, this is the way of the world, not just within the sphere of sports.
And where do we think the change will come from in that space? Because you look at say some of the bigger sports like the NFL and a powerful, strong or players union, where they don't necessarily need new revenue streams desperately, like say an emerging sport that may, if they were to share the data more openly, could create a sponsorship or revenue opportunity. And there's obviously risks with that and tied to integrity and access. Where does the group think the change is going to come from that's going to spark where it's going to be shared most?
Dan, can I jump in and taking what Angela just mentioned? I just want to step a little bit back. When we talk about the panel theme, technology, innovation, and integrity, right? We are talking. I would like to call this a kind of virtual cycle, if I may call this way. I think this is really important. It's more fundamental every time. And the sports community comes back to Angela's point. We have an important role in developing, increasing, and protecting this virtual cycle, because this affects directly the way consumers and brands relate to sports, meaning revenues from consumers and from brands. And again, if you take a look at consumers and society in general, are much more concerned about how sports and sports entities are positioning a clear purpose, their values, their integrity, and their governance. I think it comes to the core of what we're talking today. this is really fundamental. I mean, it's really so that I think the sports community has to work and spread this idea and create control systems of control in order how to move towards respecting, protecting, but taking advantage of the technology, because technology, as we saw some few examples until now, can contribute a lot to the whole aspect, to the fan engagement, to the athletes, to the OTT, to the data collection, but have a responsible use of this information. So it's, but I mean, it's really important for brands to position themselves, not only brands, but the sports entities as well, with their clear values, with governance, with compliance, because I think this has a benefit, a long-term benefit for them.
So, in building off that, because that takes investment, right? So you've got large organizations like the IOC or large governing bodies that maybe have the resources to be tracking and put the investments in to have systems and standards. And that's one of the big things that SIGA is trying to do, is tracking and measurement systems, so there is a standard of integrity. What about the organizations that don't have those resources? What does that look like from a global sports standpoint? How is there a sharing of information or best practices that groups come together? Is that unrealistic, and that's many years away?
I think there's a number of different player associations that are working actively to consider the points that we're talking about today, and to try and ensure that the athletes are better protected. You know, World Players Alliance and Global Athletes, they're all doing good things. And when you look at the smaller sports, that they are more considerate of what they're doing and the pressures that they're putting on the athletes and the expectations of the ownership in relation to the data. My concern is the complete flip side of that. It's the bigger sports that do have more control and ownership over the individuals. And you know, there are superstar athletes that the opportunity for them to be in control is much more positive than it is for the majority of the team. And I think we can't forget that there will be athletes that are completely in control, but the majority of athletes aren't in control of any of this discussion. It doesn't come into their own sphere. So how can we expect them to be able to protect themselves and consider the implication of what technology is actually doing to them? And as Angela says, these guys can just go out. Yes, some people do wear watches and Apple watches and so on and so forth. And these guys can go out and they can sell their data. They can utilize their data for their own benefits. But there are plenty of contracts that won't allow athletes to publish their own data. So as much as we think they can, there are a number of restrictions in place within their various contracts that won't let them. And sometimes it will be a sponsor that's not allowing them to do that, rather than their governing body or their sporting institution.
So one more question on the athletes, then I want to switch to the betting subjects and gambling. We started talking about Whoop and data. Are there any other product innovations that stand out to you? I referenced Peloton, that's in the news. What within the sports performance and for athletes, what other products are standing out that are changing the game, and whether positive or could create some risks?
Yeah, I've got one. If the market of, there's bespoke, the Whoop, right? Love Whoop. There's a lot of great companies like that are collecting data. Where does it go, and how is it analyzed related to one another? Like, what's the context, right? So I'm very bullish on companies like Kinduct, who sit in the athlete performance platform, or people call it the athlete management system. So those platforms that, again, are trusted and might be able to, share pieces of the information and lock off others, but are actually ingesting multiple data sources from multiple products that aren't, that allow then the user, the athlete, right, and the team, the entourage, to understand that data in context. So Kinduct is one example of a great company that does this well. We objectively analyzed them 2 years ago when we did a deep dive in athlete management systems. And that's the future, in my opinion. It's there's going to be a lot of great companies like Whoop. They're going to continue to maybe consolidate and leverage other data sets. but those that are actually analyzing that data and then predicting, right? That's what we want at the end of the day. We want more data. We want that prediction of like what to do. So those that are able to do that better require more different sets of data, and the companies like Kinduct, I think, are the ones that we should be paying attention to, those performance platforms.
It's interesting.
Go ahead, John. I'm sorry. I said there's another interesting company that I work with called Sparta Science out of Menlo Park, California. They've pioneered a force plate that when an elite athlete steps on it, jumps on it, can track that athlete's motion and is a predictor both of potential injuries and also injury prevention. And what's additionally fascinating about Sparta Science, and I think a precursor for where we're going, is all of its information is put into the cloud, where it's shareable with everybody in a different organization. You can run correlations on the data that's been collected. They've done the last 4 to 5 years of the NFL draft combine. As much as we talk about athlete health, the development of systems at the club level, whether it's the NBA or EPL or whatever, it still remains a little bit old-fashioned. A lot of information exists on spreadsheets. The use of the cloud to share data is really going to break through. Also, to Angela's point before, and we're just early days now, different devices are going to intersect with each other, on an opt-in basis from the user. So for instance, you can imagine connections between Whoop and Strava, where you can take a look at, depending upon what kind of recovery you had, how your run was the next day and what the implications are for that. These things are coming as these data sets get integrated. And again, I think there's a lot of movement, will be a lot of movement to opt-in in order to protect the privacy of users and athletes.
Which is interesting when you think about, is it only a matter of time before there's hacking? If Warren Buffett and Barack Obama can have their Twitter feeds hacked simultaneously, right. Athlete data can seem anonymous, but then imagine the hacking when you start talking about, the betting industry. So staying with that for a second on sports betting, what do you see as the biggest challenges in terms of maintaining the integrity? Because plenty of things have happened in the past with tennis and obviously the impact referees or officials can have. What can the sports industry do to maintain the integrity at a time when there's also so much excitement from the properties holders and media companies about the influx of revenue streams that will come from the sports betting entities?
I would just say two things I'll just throw out. One, Sport Radar, for instance, uses AI to do integrity services now for leagues where they can analyze every single bet. And as their data set gets better, they can suggest and identify what appear to be anomalies. Second, I think, and this gets this whole topic, is just communication and honesty. I listened to a panel a few months ago where Steve Young, the former NFL quarterback Hall of Famer, was saying, "Okay, great, it's an in-game wager where the question is who's going to get the first completion, which wide receiver or who's going to catch the first ball in this football game." He says, "Gee, I'm the quarterback. Don't you think I have some control over what that happens? Don't you think it's possible to corrupt me if it's not organized properly?" And so to me, this gets to communication. Are people going to talk to each other? Are they going to try to safeguard what happens? Because if you just roll the balls out and let it go as it pleases, you will have no shortage of problems, especially as you get into sports with younger and younger athletes.
So building off that for the rest of the panel, what things can be put in place to make sure that abuses don't happen? And then also, I think, what are the ramifications when there are things that happen is obviously key, which, we saw with somewhat of a different subject, but the rules are the rules, and Djokovic may be the best player, but he was, taken out of the Open, which obviously has so much domino effect on economic impact and so forth. So what are the things can be done to ensure that integrity?
I mean, you've got to have effective policies, haven't you? And you've got to have the right type of legislation behind you. And the biggest issue with transient sport is that athletes around the world they live in different legal structures and different legal systems. So each and every organization is ruled in effectively a different way. So when you're talking about gambling, betting, sanctions, those kinds of things, the sanctions in every environment are going to be different. And it's athletes can, and that they can end up in corrupt circles. Cricket is a great example of this, and the people will groom athletes for years and years and years before they actually make a move and swoop in and utilize the athlete. And by having knowledge on the athlete, it gives them more opportunity to befriend those individuals. So from my perspective, absolutely exactly what John's just said, but adding on to that, it's this idea of world regulation policies, some form of harmonization, so that athletes understand how they can protect themselves, how they can get support, where they can get support from, and that the policies across the world reflect the sports that they're looking at. Football, their policies here compared to soccer, the policies in the UK compared to the policies in the US, compared to the policies in Brazil, are really different. And if you don't have harmonization, you're lowering the standard of care that's offered to the sport itself.
Yeah, I would.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Angela.
So just from an athlete perspective, when I was on the IOC, I was a part of the original sort of integrity conference that we had. I think you're totally spot on, Genevieve. Like, we need international standards. One thing I learned, which made sense, John brought up Steve Young. You've got these high-profile athletes with a lot to lose if they throw a game, and then you've got Sportradar and other companies using AI and people to understand those differences, so they can call out anomalies. At the lower tier level, athletes, there aren't those data sets of these lower tier cricket games or lower tier hockey games to know games are being thrown, and there's more of an incentive for those athletes to be targeted. Sports bettors might make the same amount of money and have a less risk profile, if you will, of these lower profile athletes. So I think it's both the international standards, the education of the athlete, which they don't understand that they, once they're trapped, and really looking at, again, Sportradar as an example. They've done a lot during COVID because there aren't fans in the stands, therefore they can't have their people checking off scores, to use AI and other technologies to actually ensure that those odds are correct. So I think that piece of the market's also going to get better, where you can ingest more data to actually create efficient odds in the market. So you'll be able to catch these anomalies again in these lower tier sports, or just overall. And take esports as an example. That's going to take off, and we don't have the data yet to have those odds in esports. So I just wanted to build off of what Genevieve said from the global leadership. We really need that right now.
And jumping, Dan, if you allow me, and jumping to esports, I mean, that's a big challenge they have. They have a lack of a universal regulation. That's a big challenge for them. I mean, how can you put together all the leagues and different teams and champions? It's a big challenge for them, and it's fundamental for them to grow as a whole, as a big industry. So it's a big challenge they have. Soccer, I mean, it's kind of settled, as Genevieve mentioned. It's every worldwide, how or less how it works. But in case of esports, that's a big challenge.
It's a good point, Ricardo.
Dan, it's fascinating. Yesterday at this conference, Ian Smith, who's the leader of ESIC, was saying how almost all of his hours are now occupied in this coaches scandal going on in the CSGO esport, where basically a bug in the system allowed many of the top coaches to see the boards of the competitors and thus be able to coach their players to take advantage of it, which totally undermines the game. And to the extent the game is being bet on, has a whole set of ramifications for that. Ian's presentation about this was really important and is indicative of how that you just can't assume the integrity of these things. And we'll see what happens, but they're going to have some pretty stern recourse in order to discourage cheating, which is also made worse in COVID because you just can't see everything the way you could normally.
Which is interesting when you talk about things that can happen, right? And Ricardo, to your point, esports and fast-growing companies, typically, fast-growing startups aren't going to have the infrastructure or probably the systems in place because they're moving fast. So whose responsibility is it? And do you feel like we've seen enough ramifications when something happens? So when the Astros had the World Series scandal, did any sponsors leave baseball because of that? What's been the similar thing in sports to the Facebook ban on advertising? I'd love to get your thoughts on that subject.
I can give you an example. I mean, I'm going to go to Brazil. An example in Brazil, it's Pacto pelo Esporte. It's a pact for sport that is a member of SIGA. It's an international member of SIGA. What I mean, they created like a group of clients, of sponsors, that for the sports entities to be sponsored by any of these signature members of Pacto pelo Esporte, they have to follow a set of regulations. If they do not comply with one of the points of the Pacto pelo Esporte, companies that belong to this association will not sponsor these guys. And we have so many examples nowadays that sports entities search the market for sponsorship opportunities, and the market is already demanding if they have the stamp of Pacto pelo Esporte. That's a really important credential for them to get sponsored. So I think it's not an easy job, it's not an easy process, it's not fast, but I think it's something that the whole sports industry, as we've been mentioning in this panel, has to work and has to develop. It's easy for some.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's easy for some parts, more hard, difficult to others, but I think it's a step by step that is going to have results in the future.
Philippe, I'd love your take on this because I know you have a lot of experience with tracking and systems of that nature in terms of how to be measuring this and really having systems in place to catch where there's integrity is challenged.
This is not an easy one. Let's say technologically, and again, technology is just there to support. Technology, you can do a lot of things, but clearly you need first regulation and you need to make sure that all rules and compliance are very well done. In my opinion, the technology is supporting the regulation. When I read basically the standards developed by SIGA, clearly I see a really big part of what should be done. Technology is just there to support, meaning data exchange, privacy, track and trace, all this stuff is basically just a support to all this regulation. And I think if people comply to the rules defined by SIGA, I think it will make the job.
Super. I'm going to go to switch gears and go to some of the great questions we're getting from the audience and some of the subjects that we've touched on to go deeper on. Question from Jim Whitefield, the CEO of the International Society for Sports Psychiatry. What is the future of artificial intelligence and sport? Open up to anyone.
It's booming. It's booming, and it's booming in almost every category. We talked about Whoop, we talked about Sparta Science, we talked about others. There's a terrific company called WSC Sports that is revolutionizing sports highlights. There's another company called Kizwi, which has basically created the broadcast truck in the cloud. And I mentioned before just the importance of cloud technology. The modern companies that are going to dominate will have this significant set of data and will be able to continue to expand that data to better understand what they're doing. It's the movement everywhere. And AI is going to have an impact in how we watch the games, how the games are played. It's really early, but it's just profound.
Angela, I know you're studying, technology integration into sport actively with Sports Innovation Lab. Any thoughts, Deb?
No, I think John hit the nail on the head. What we do in all of our research is think about what's going on in the broader ecosystem. So again, quantified athlete is quantified self. It's health and human performance. Smart venue is smart city, right? Smart cities are getting better, faster. All of that's going to be applied to the venue, right? AI, you could talk about it from cloud or edge computing or any buzzword, if you will, or real, they're all real technologies. They are getting, sports is a massive market that they can move into, previously untapped, right? So a lot of these companies think the media market alone, sports is going to serve as a really nice either test bed for them to test it out and have a very nice story as, again, sponsors want to go global, or just have that story of what can cloud do for your company. So that's why I think, again, we're seeing a ton of these big technology giants coming into sports. They want to actually deliver a better experience because there's real monetization, but they also want that story. So the more that the sports industry can understand edge and AI and all these buzzwords, I think it behooves us all because it's coming in no small way, shape, or form.
And for the group, you mentioned the technology giants and watching the Intel TrueView, which is amazing in terms of the angles now and enhanced fan experience of viewing. Who's doing it? Who's doing it really well? What tech companies come in and said, "Wow, they're really invested in the right way to change sport"? And maybe on the other side, who's not getting it, and who's had a lot of innovation. Obviously, comes with learning by doing, but where there's been some challenges in the space as well for the group.
Always impressed with Amazon, and I think you're going to see more and more from them as we go on. I'm not sure, Marie Donahue is there running sports, and everyone is expecting huge rights acquisitions out of Amazon, maybe, but I think what you're really going to see is going to be changes in how sports are covered and business models that are built around that. We haven't really talked about it, but something to come. I really think you're going to see a big breakthrough in augmented reality technologies. There's a huge population using these things now. Verizon announced there's going to be a co-viewing app that will be starting with the NFL tonight. And one of the aspects about it is going to be just using AR to access stats. If you watch the MLS games from the bubble, from the bubble in Orlando, you saw all this signage, and actually only the perimeter around the field was real. Everything else was virtual. So that's an example of technology that's really going to burgeon, I believe.
To that point, John, I was at Super Bowl in Miami this past year, and Verizon's showcasing their technology in stadium where a fan can hold up their mobile phone and essentially point it towards any athlete and see their stats. It's just totally going to enhance the experience. And obviously the challenge of not wanting to go to games compared to watching at home, it's going to take some of those innovations. Any other innovations of that nature that the group has seen that's exciting to you when we talk about the positive side of enhanced fan experience?
I think we haven't mentioned the 5G. I mean, when it comes, it's going to improve much more all these experiences we are talking. I mean, the speed of the improvement is going to be crucial. And coming back to John's point, I agree. I think Amazon is doing a good job. Maybe not coming to the live sports, not yet, as a lot of people in the market expected, but working a lot with sports content. What Angela just mentioned, I mean, how important is a great content for you to create fan engagement, and the COVID situation show us and enhance the importance of, even though we haven't had any live sports, many of these sports entities started creating a lot of content for you to keep your fan close to you. So I think Amazon is doing a great job in this sports content direction, and I think they will come sooner or later in the sports acquisition rights as well.
Definitely.
And I would just add, the future of watching sports looks very different than, and we talk a lot about fluid fans, that the diehard old fan likes to lean back and wants a beautiful experience. That will always be there, but we're seeing declining rates of TV, and we're seeing increased rates of social, digital, OTT. So our big, we just wrote a report called The Future of Watching Sports, and our take is that fans want to do something. And so the technologies that enable you to have that agency, these fluid fans that can lean in and combine your media experience, your live event experience, and your social experience in what we call a fluid fan studio, is the future. It's a participatory fan community that helps you develop more and better experiences around around being there, around being at home. And so with COVID, we think there's going to be, again, a big shift to maybe I don't want to go to an event in the future. Maybe I like being at home, but I don't just want to lean back. I want to lean in and I want to do something. And that could come in many shapes and forms. And again, think watch parties, think social viewing, think overlays and betting. And so this agency of fans is really the future, I think, of watching sports in particular. And that's what we're paying attention to.
Which in a way is a challenge for the leagues as well, because people maybe want to keep at home and having the whole big experience. Of course, it's not the same as being in the stadium, but as you mentioned, technology advancements will be so great that you feel there with virtual reality, all this information. So it's going to be a challenge for the leagues as well, how to convince people maybe to leave their homes to go to a stadium.
Ricardo, it's interesting with the challenge. I mean, some of the ratings during COVID are concerning and probably a wake-up call, because people's habits may have changed and what hasn't changed back. Where do we think the investment's going to come from? Because it's a catch-22. There's so much revenue reduction from all the revenue streams in sports. Who are the groups that are going to lead that investment, and are they going to be the ones that ultimately rise to the top?
No, I would have thought sponsors are going to play a big part in making sure that the revenue streams are available, so the sports can recover and continue and do better things. And Angela said, Ricardo said about the increase in participation. If you can be an individual at your house and you've got 3 screens, you can participate and virtually participate in 3 different sports. So you're spiking the numbers. And I think that idea will help sponsors consider the identification for recovery pathways to give the sports the investment that they need.
Ricardo talked about 5G, and you're going to see big spending there. This week, PointsBet, sports betting entity based out of Australia, made deals both with the University of Colorado in Denver after sports betting went live there, as well as the Nuggets and Avalanche. So sports betting companies, DraftKings went public, through a SPAC. There's going to be a lot of money and investment there, at least within the U.S.
Definitely. And John, I want to start with you. It's been such a great discussion. I'm being asked to wrap things up as we move along in the next panel discussion. But so I'd love to just go down the line and start with you, John. If there was one thing that we feel like is going to be the thing to watch on this subject overall in the next 6 months to a year, what would you say we should be looking out for?
I think it's all about the fans. The biggest takeaway for me has been how much I have missed having fans at the venue, fans involved with sports. The panelists talked about the challenges of getting people back into the venues. Sports is not the same without fans. And I think we have a huge recognition of that globally. And that's something I'm looking to do. And I believe the sports and organizations that best cultivate and serve their fans are going to be the ones who will come out of this quickest and best.
Absolutely. Philippe?
Okay, for me, I think I joined this view. Basically, the fans are very important. The sport itself is very important for everyone. I think to have the fan basically continuing to watch and to follow the sport and the sports people, basically, it's very key. This will be, in my view, the key for financial, as we discussed before. The financial will be merchandising and all the things around the sport, basically, which the fan will continue to buy and will support, basically, the sport. Definitely.
Genevieve, closing thoughts?
Exploitation of all of the participants.
To squeeze as much monetization out of it as possible, probably, right?
Yep. You read my notes, Dan.
Definitely a challenge, right?
Very much so.
Ricardo, no pressure. Wrap it up for us.
I agree with John. I think fans, it's how to get to know your fans, how to offer services to them, how to engage them, and how to monetize a lot from them. I agree. That's the main thing.
Absolutely. I like how Angela coined it of the participatory fan studio. You can picture these modern at-home studios. My son's in one pretty much right now downstairs with his headset on gaming as we speak. Well, Thank you so much to everyone on the panel. Fantastic discussion. I appreciate the thoughtful questions from the audience. And thank you, Siga, because discussions like this and the breadth of the subjects that this whole week during the Sports Integrity Week that they're raising, the communication is key for these subjects to be addressed, and then for standards and consistency across sports globally to be put in place. So I think the future is bright despite the challenges going on. So thanks for everybody participating.